You're welcome to the webinar entitled Data Informed Student Mentoring. My name is Via and I am the Senior International Consultant at GL Education. And I'll now hand it over to Priya to introduce herself.
My name is Priyamvada Taneja. I'm the founder of Priyamvada Taneja Consulting. We are an education consulting firm and we work with K-12 schools. We also offer professional development workshops for teachers and school leaders. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with Veer, talking about how schools can identify gaps between student aptitude and attainment and understand the causes, and also how a mentoring program can be put in place. So we want to learn from Veer's experience, who's done this in his school, former school, before he started to work with GL Education. So before I begin with the question, there is a Q&A box. So we welcome questions from participants. Please put in your questions and we'd be happy to answer either during the call or after the webinar. So Veer, I want to ask you, what is really mentoring and why did you decide to implement it at your school that you were working at before you started working for GL Education?
Yeah, thank you. So to kind of frame the question, I worked at an international school in Kathmandu in Nepal, and the students there were a mixture of locally born students, but also international students as well. And we followed a British curriculum all the way up to GCSEs and A-levels. We were using a lot of standardized external assessments, such as the cognitive abilities test and PASS as well, which is the attitudinal survey, which I believe you've heard about in previous webinars. So within that context, we decided to start a mentoring program. So to answer your first question around what is mentoring, really it's a process to support and encourage young people or people in general to manage their own learning in order for them to maximize their potential, to develop their skills, to improve their performance, and ultimately to reach their goals. So the reason that we decided to implement this in our school was that we had the opportunity for some one-to-one sessions with students that we were supporting who were in year 9 and year 10, so around 14, 15, 16 years old, the sort of mid-teens age group. And one of the things that you mentioned at the start was around kind of the difference between ability and attainment. So students we were witnessing students who were quite highly able based on their CAT4 scores. So their baseline was strong and therefore they should have been aiming for quite high grades. But actually their attainment was slightly lower than you might expect for that level of ability. And we actually found that by conducting the PASS survey, we found that there were various aspects of that, and we can go into more detail about this later, but there were various aspects of that were slightly not negative, but lower than they should be. And we decided that mentoring was one way to find out a bit more about the causes of that, and then also provide students with the support to develop some of those study skills and other areas to enable them to meet their full potential. So that was the kind of reason for introducing it.
Sure. And I think what the context that you've given is very similar to the schools in India. And I think there are students who, and I think what you just said, and I think it really sums up our webinar conversation, and this being a final webinar, that you begin with the CAT assessment and find out where the students are. You're able to see what their aptitude is and can be. And then you look at the PASS survey and look at what their attitudes towards school are, and then you put in a mentoring program so that you can help students bridge that gap. And I think it seems like a really good solution and a complete solution for a lot of schools who are in a similar context in India. So tell me something, what are the steps that you took to implement the mentoring program? Because I think there's always this challenge, and schools are constantly saying that we want to do a lot, but where is the time? How do we do it?
Yes, actually, that's the never-ending question, isn't it? When do we fit this all into our schedule? Yeah, so I think just like you summed it up really well there in terms of sort of the triangulation of data. So setting the baseline with the CAT4 cognitive abilities test and then working up from there. So really that was our first step. So looking very closely at the data for this specific year group. So we started small. We just looked at one particular year group grade level and looked at their ability data from CAT4. We looked at their attainment data, which was from our own internal assessments as well as other external assessments. And we compared that to their attitudinal past data. And we noticed that there were several patterns that were taking place. So there were students who had high ability, high attainment, but low attitudinal scores, which didn't quite make sense because they're doing quite well, but for some reason they didn't believe in themselves. There were students who had quite high ability scores, lower attainment scores, and then those low attainment scores could be explained by low attitudinal scores as well. And there were some students who had slightly lower ability, but their attainment was higher than their ability might suggest. And then their attitudes data was also quite positive. So obviously there was something that they were doing in terms of their attitudes towards learning that was really contributing towards their success. So we took all of those different kind of patterns, I guess, and came up with different student profiles for each student. And those were shared with their teachers. We also interviewed specific students with different types of profiles to find out a bit more about them, what they enjoyed in their learning, what they didn't enjoy, what they thought was going well, etc. Lots of in-depth questions. And then from that, we devised a bank of specific interventions for different teachers and mentors to use. And then that fed into these one-to-one conversations that we were having. So from my particular perspective, I was involved as assessment coordinator, both in terms of devising the program, collecting all the data, speaking with the students, but I was also involved on a mentor level. So I had a small group of students who were 15 years old, who I worked with to use that past data to really understand what their difficulties were and then go into that one-to-one mentoring program with them.
Sure.
Quite data-driven.
Yeah, so what I can hear is, what I'm hearing is that moving away from anecdotal stories or anecdotes that you hear from teachers about students, you actually depended a lot on the data and used that to inform the program and get students to reach their potential, which and identified the gaps. So how did you share this information with the students and teachers and even parents? How did they accept this and how did you share that information?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So I think what you said just there, it does take away some of that subjectivity. But if you're obviously teacher judgment is very, very important, but if you're relying on that, then obviously it can be quite subjective. So I think it was really important in terms of sharing this data to be quite clear about that, to inform teachers, mentors, everyone involved that it wasn't a sort of process that was meant to undermine their own judgment. It was just something which was supposed to add to that. They were supposed to support and add to their own judgment of their students. In terms of sharing it with them, kind of tied into the process that we were just talking about, really. So the first thing we had to do was ensure that all the teachers understood what the data was saying, so how to analyze it essentially, and involved some level of training to share how to analyze and understand all the different reports that come with the data, and really break it down so that it was quite simple to understand. We created some of our own graphs as well, which quite straightforwardly, there was a graph for each student and it compared the student's ability level to their attainment, to their attitudes, gave them a score out of 100. So that it was really easy to see what all those different patterns were that I was talking about. And then alongside that, also shared some key questions that the mentors, teachers could ask during those one-to-one mentoring sessions, so that it was much more of a so sort of a guided mentoring, and every student was receiving the same experience.
Sure.
In terms of students, we were quite honest with them, but also made sure that they understood that none of this was a judgment on them as individuals. It was really a supportive tool. And what it really did for me personally is it really helped to open up the conversations, because as I'm sure everyone has experienced, sometimes teenagers can be quite closed, not always willing to share. But armed with this extra data and this extra information, which they knew was coming from an outside organization, it wasn't something that we'd put together. I think that was a really nice way to start some of those more detailed conversations with students. So I had, and again, I'll go into this in a bit more detail, but I had a couple of students who were quite reluctant to open up. But if I asked them quite specific questions about what was coming from the data, if I showed them their own kind of set of data, then they were much more willing to open up and ask questions and give answers as well. So the way that it was shared was with students was in a one-to-one way, sort of so that they felt safe, secure, and it was quite clear that the conversation was just about them and nothing else. And parents, we didn't really get to the stage of sharing it with parents, just because we felt that it was quite important for the students to take ownership, especially at that age, really take ownership for their own learning, for their own progress, and kind of enforce and emphasize that idea.
Sure, yeah. You've touched some really important points. One is that how building capacity of the teachers to be able to analyze that data. That's really important. Making it safe and secure for students to have those conversations, because it's not an easy task, because you're talking about attitudes that you're probably getting the data for students, and that's not easy for students. And it's so important to be delicate and to be mindful and to be supportive of students when you're talking about that data. And I think what you also said, which is extremely important, is that this is considered not as a judgment, it's a support to get them to do better. And I think with that intent, the mentoring program works. And I think that's really very, very important. So what you did with this entire program was be very intentional about what you're doing and structured the program like that. So tell me a little more about the impact that it had on this, student mentoring program. And if you can tell us some specific examples, that'll be great.
Yeah, sure. So I will use some specific examples just to identify the kinds of conversations that were had. So just building on what I was talking about just now, the group of students that I had, some of them were already quite open to having conversations. They were quite perceptive of their own strengths, of their own areas for improvement, and that they knew what they needed to do. But there were other students who were quite unaware of what they needed to do to improve. They knew that they were perhaps underperforming a little bit compared to their own ability and what they might expect of themselves. But they also thought that they'd be able to catch up by the time their exams come and everything would be okay. So there wasn't really much self-drive and self-questioning and self and I guess it boils down to sort of a lack of self-confidence in a sense, because these particular students thought that either they were doing fine and they couldn't do any better, or they didn't really want to do any better, or they thought that it would all be fine in the end, but they didn't know kind of how to get there, if that makes sense. So in terms of the actual mentoring program, I'll focus on two specific students briefly. So the first student was doing okay in terms of attainment, but they weren't necessarily meeting all their targets in their subjects. So there was room for improvement. and I had a good mentoring relationship with them, but there were some issues that were coming up as they moved through their important exam years. So tying it back to the past survey, there were 3 factors, which again, I think you've heard about in previous webinars, but there were 3 factors which were a bit lower for this student. So preparedness for learning, which is all about sort of study skills, attentiveness, concentration, also general work ethic. So the student wanted to do well, but they weren't sure why they wanted to do well. They didn't really have any set goals in terms of what they wanted to do in terms of a career or whether they wanted to go to university. And obviously you don't need to have those when you're in year 10, year 11, you're quite young, but I think it's a good idea to start thinking about kind of what you're interested in and that kind of thing, but they literally had no idea. So I think that was kind of a bit of a block for them. And also confidence in learning. So perseverance when faced with a challenge, resilience, that kind of thing, which I think if you're kind of quite an able student, when you're a bit younger, you're able to access the learning much more easily. As you get a bit older and it gets more difficult, you haven't developed the skills to access more difficult pieces of learning and really kind of figure them out for yourself. So these were kind of the general difficulties for this student, and what kind of the research suggested were that they find it hard to students like this find it hard to maintain discipline or motivation. They find it difficult to motivate themselves. They might need support to do this, and they are easily discouraged and also heavily influenced by external factors such as the quality of teaching. So for this student, we set some objectives through the mentoring conversation, which were around sort of building their resilience when faced with a challenge, for me to find out a bit more about their aspirations, so I could have some more kind of detailed conversations with them, and also discuss modifying their approach to their own revision and study. So they were a bit more of a visual learner, but they were learning in a verbal way, which wasn't quite right for them as an individual. So we discussed kind of modifying that a little bit. And finally, kind of to move towards what worked for the student. So providing explicit help with kind of study skills, planning, providing techniques for structuring their time, also generating some SMART targets, so specific, measured, time measured, etc. All that, those kinds of targets to visualize their progress towards their goals and aspirations. And also providing some time for metacognition, so really thinking about their own strengths, what to improve, and how they can use those to feed into their learning. And that meant that they were able to kind of improve their overall academic performance and more broadly move towards their goals and academic potential.
Sure. I think what you've pointed out through this entire example is also that through this process, the students are taking ownership of their own learning. They are thinking about what is it that I can do to do better and to attain the levels that I should be attaining. And also in this process, the mentor has played a very supportive and role in this entire process. And I think the one-on-one conversations, I think with teenagers, I think that works the best, really, because they really want to be heard. They want to know, they want to take ownership for their learning, but you're right when you said that they really don't know how to do that. Yeah. So while you were doing the mentoring program, I mean, what were the kind of questions that you would ask in a one-on-one conversation with them? I mean, are these, when you put that program, is there a structure to that program? Are there certain questions that you asked, or is it something that anybody can take that role?
Yeah, so I think anyone can sort of take that role. I think so with mentoring, it's really about, and actually to touch on something you said there, it really kind of strengthened and refocused the mentoring relationship, having those one-on-one conversations. So at a high level, kind of the first few sessions were dedicated to really finding out about the student and really looking at their data, talking about their data, their data specifically with the student, finding out why particular areas or why they thought particular areas were slightly lower for them, and really kind of exploring, that sort of higher level conversation and trying to for them to understand, I guess, what the purpose of this whole mentoring relationship was, and for me to understand exactly what their thoughts were, what they were thinking, what the data was saying about them. And then kind of really focusing very specifically on some key kind of questions. I mean, there were loads and loads of questions based on kind of the students' different types of profile that we had come up with. But just to give you a few examples, so for example, for this particular student, it was that resilience was really important. So a question might be, tell me about a piece of work which or a subject that has gone wrong or hasn't gone quite as you expected this year. Why was that? And then start to kind of go into that, dig a bit deeper into that. You really understand kind of their thought process, what they found difficult, and how they might approach it differently next time. The questions, tell me something you'd like to improve. How can we plan to do that? So quite open questions, but then coming down to the specific details of how they actually want to get there. As you were saying, I think some students find it really difficult they know what they want, but they don't know how to get there. Other questions, what do your teachers really need to know about you? So again, making sure that making sure that they feel like they're getting their voice across, that teachers are really kind of tailoring what they're saying and tailoring the teaching towards them as an individual. What do you admire most about your friends? How can you share that with them? So really getting them to open up about what they find impressive, what they want to aspire to, that kind of thing. And just also more broad questions like what is the most important thing to you right now? And how does school fit into that? So how does school fit into their general life? What are their thoughts about that? So fairly open-ended questions, but then getting down to more specific details as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that really sounds like an excellent program that you put together at your school. That brings me to the end of the questions that I had. And if there are any questions from the participants, we can perhaps answer that. So is there anything that you've got, Veer, in the Q&A?
I haven't seen anything, no. I can't see anything here. Or maybe I've just got... yes, I've got one question here. So what was the reaction from students and parents? Parents, I'll start with parents, it's a bit easier. We, like I said, we didn't get to the stage of sharing everything with the parents. We wanted to keep it quite sort of student focused. In terms of students though, the response was positive. I think in terms of the mentoring relationship, what it really did was it strengthened and refocused that relationship. So having some actual kind of hard evidence and data, which was unbiased, which was just kind of there, really informed the conversation. So a lot of those questions that I just mentioned stemmed from the responses to the past survey. So while obviously we had relationships with our mentees prior to this exercise, it really kind of strengthened that because the students could see that we were really interested in them, it also really dug into the specific details of the difficulties they were facing, and really made sure that any changes or any interventions that we were making were data driven, were the right things to do, and they were measurable as well. So yeah, I think it really helps those relationships.
Sure. Great. Yeah.
I've got one more question if there's time.
I think just a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe the last one. So the question is, if a school wanted to introduce a similar program, what would your top 3 tips be? So I would say top tip would be don't rush it. It's something that needs to be well planned and well thought out and needs to fit the context of your school.
Yeah.
So look at the data closely, make a plan, and make sure that it will work, because otherwise it can be more damaging than helpful. Second thing is make sure that all the teachers and mentees are actively involved. So like I've mentioned previously, make sure that they fully understand the data, make sure they understand the purposes and objectives of any program that you put into place, and make sure that they are enthusiastic and willing to, take part. And thirdly, I think it's really important in any mentoring program just to listen. So you can ask, loads and loads of questions, but if you're not actively listening to the answers and acting on those, then it's kind of a pointless exercise. So I would say mentoring is all about asking the right questions, but making sure that you listen to the answers as well.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. I think this has been really helpful for participants who've attended. We'll also send you the recording, so you can also listen to our recordings. And if you didn't attend the last 2 sessions, you can see those recordings as well. So thank you very much, Veer. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. You too. It's been a pleasure.